How could memory or time be distracting me from who I am? Because we put so much emphasis on memory. Like, you have conversation with somebody, what do you talk about? You see an old friend, you talk about the past, you talk about the way things were. Or, you get into talking about the future, and it's very difficult for people to be really present, like, especially with your devices and everything. You sit down to have a conversation with somebody, you're doing a bunch of things at once. And we're coming to this time now where we realize that that's taking away from the quality of life, and science is backing that up, that multitasking is not actually something that can be done. It's just like doing a bunch of tasks in a very poor manner versus doing one very well, but what happens is, with memory, it causes you to feel small. Unless, of course, you've had a life where up until this present moment, everything in your life has supported you to feel like the best version of yourself. Most people can't say that. Most people have had a bunch of different experiences and then base their perception of reality on that memory. Or like we say, like, oh, well, the body should be able to live this many years or something like that because that's the way it's always been. Well, the way it's always been isn't necessarily true, because there's always the potential for some shift or change. So if you're basing things on the way things have always been, you start to lose sight of the way things actually are. And the way things actually are, like we discussed, is emerging infinite potential. That's the world that you live in reality right now. There's so much emerging infinite potential all around you. You look at it, you see it everywhere, and you acknowledge you're that. As soon as you start living in the past or in the future, the present moment is made up of the past and the future. That's how we got to where we are. But if you start focusing on only the past or memory or time, you may start thinking in a way that, oh, it can only be like this because, tradition. That's the danger with tradition. Tradition says this is the tradition, we must not color outside of the tradition. Well, how did it become a tradition? Well, usually it became a tradition because somebody did something different than the tradition. Somebody came along and went, like, look at Jesus is a good example. Somebody came along and said, yeah, I know you all do it this way, but that doesn't make sense, so now we're going to do it like this. And everybody goes, oh, wow, that really works. Well, that was somebody being very present, not going, well, we must do this because so-and-so said that we must. And then it creates a tradition. So our call, and that's tapping into the emerging infinite potential that's everywhere. That's who you are. Everybody has the capacity to do that, or to be a Buddha. But the way you do it is you have to put aside the expectations of the past. And that can be a challenging thing because you're conditioned in school not to do that. You must do it this way. How do you learn in school? Do they tell you in school, is the focus your emerging infinite potential? Is the focus your breathing that's happening in the present moment? Not really. I mean, maybe it's changing. I'm watching my daughter, she's 6 and being educated. It is changing from when I was a kid, but there is a lot of focusing on the way things were, and there's room for that, but that shouldn't be the primary focus. The primary focus is that in every moment are millions of possibilities, and then you create each day like that. When you wake up in the morning, you start fresh, and you always have the opportunity to start fresh. But when you start placing a lot of emphasis on the surface, thought, memory, someday then I'll be happy, that's not very present, and it's very limited. Like, how do you know? What if you've tried something completely different? And I think that's what I mean by that. It's that when you start putting, it's like we reminisce about the good old days, or we think, You know, I remember when I was a kid, like I ate a radish, and I never tried a radish before. And then later that day, I didn't feel well, and I got sick. And then I put it in my head that it was because I ate the radish. Well, then I didn't eat radishes for a long, long, long time. And I created this whole story about radishes based on a memory. Well, then when I was older, I thought, oh, what could be the harm? Let's try the radish. And nothing happened, you know. And that's a good analogy when we base things on memory. You know, sometimes things happen to us in the past that allow us to correct some kind of behavior. But I think that ultimately, you know, I think as meditators and spiritual practitioners, the path in the end is no path. Or the techniques that you use, that you learn from the past, are like a raft to get you across the river. And if they get you across the river, you don't pick up the raft and take it with you. You leave it there, you know. Imagine that you're going on a journey and you have to figure out some way to get across the river. And you try all of these things, and then you create this raft to get across based on your failed attempts. And you get to the other side and you go, that's great. What happens if we come to another river? Let's take this raft with us. Then you have to travel with this stupid raft with you the whole time. It doesn't work like that. You know, or it's like, I was listening to one of my greatest teachers, Alan Watts, talking about how a spiritual teacher should be like a good doctor. A good doctor wants to get rid of their patients, not acquire more patients. You know, and the problem with a spiritual teacher is they're trying to get more patients and keep the patients. Well, you don't want that. You know, don't we all want to recognize that we're emerging infinite potential, that we're not something that happened to you when you were a child, or limited in some way because of your gender or the color of your skin, or, you know, how much money your family had. You know, you are a part of nature. You are emerging infinite potential. And if you can stay focused on that in the present moment, you're completely free.
Do you yourself find that memory doesn't trouble you very often anymore, or do you still encounter it where you have to kind of observe that?
It pops in, and then it's like sifting through thought. It's like, oh, that's useful, and then you use it. And other times, like, why am I even thinking that? That's not me. And then you leave it. You know, it's not saying, I mean, maybe it would be nice if you could just completely clear the database, but there are some things you would like to remember. You know, it's just creating a healthy relationship with it where you are not defined by memory. It's something that you have, like fingernails. You know, fingernails are useful. Imagine if you didn't have any fingernails. If you had a hangnail before your nail fall off, it's painful. But that's not who you are. You know, it's useful, but you are the user. Don't be used by it.
I think like that is sort of useful way to think about it on sort of simpler memories or smaller, but what about like one giant traumatic memory that got you locked into sort of a mind frame? What can we do about that?
Well, you develop a practice where you're constantly reminding yourself that you are emerging infinite potential. How do you do that in a practical way? I mean, that's pretty out there, right? You connect to that part of you that was there even before the Big Bang. Well, what was there before the Big Bang? Sound, breath, you know. And you just pay attention, like I just said, pay attention to the breathing. Or with sound, like I don't even need a specific, some people don't want to do a mantra because it's like, oh, it's part of some belief system or doctrine. They have hang-ups. I think one way you can really practice sound and observe your emerging infinite potential is to go somewhere like this park where we are and close your eyes or keep them a little bit 1/10 open and try and listen to everything at once. You know, you hear. Doesn't it expand your view? Like when you're thinking about your thought or your problem, it becomes as vast as this, but it's one small thing. But if you go and you just listen and you hear there's children over here, there's wind in the trees over here, but you're not, over time you won't even be labeling it. You just be listening to everything at once. All of a sudden you have this experience of the vastness of life, and there's freedom in that, you know. And it's a process. That's the, you know, I'm not just saying, oh, just try and listen to everything at once and all your problems disappear. But the end result of all of this stuff is to realize that you're it, you know. It's like, why go looking to get something out of life when you're life itself? That's who you are. You know, you are all of this. So yes, you may be experiencing that problem and it may seem like it's debilitating and all there is, but broaden the lens a little bit and you'll see who you are.